kids.
This is Learning to Dad
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
with Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm gonna have fun, and you're gonna have fun.
Hello and welcome to Learning to Dad. My name is Tyler Ross and my guest today is Steve Gordon. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, Tyler, excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed our quick little intro talk before we jumped on here. But, in reviewing your biography, I'll hit a couple of these high points. You're an author, a best-selling author. You're the founder of The Unstoppable CEO. You host a podcast. When you were under 30, just 28 years old, you ended up being the CEO of a engineering firm and have since gone on to create a new consulting business, helping service-oriented business get their marketing in line and lead generation and things. And one of the things that I'm excited to kind of segue into is what you call the getting the true freedom of business, because I'm sure that'll apply to workers who want more freedom to spend time with their kids. So let's start a little bit on your bio background, like where are you from? Where do you live now?
So I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and went to the University of Florida. I'm second generation Gator, and my daughter is a third generation Gator now. And now I live in Tallahassee, which is sort of like the big rival town. So home of Florida State University. So it's very, very interesting to live here and be a little bit on the outside of that. But yeah, we have a great time. And
do you have dueling flags on the front porch with the Seminoles on one side and Gators on the other?
No, thankfully my wife went to Florida as well. So we here, the theme or the motto of the alumni club for UF here is civilization among the savages, because Florida State is Seminoles. But yeah, we have a good time. A lot of our friends went to Florida State, so it's always interesting in football season.
That's great. So you were born in Jacksonville?
I was actually born in Anchorage, Alaska. That's a whole other story, but I grew up in Jacksonville, yeah.
Okay, great. So you've been a Florida boy for most of your life. It sounds like just about all of your life. So what was your first introduction to professional life? Like, what was your first job?
Oh gosh, my very first job, I sold shoes for a local competitor to Foot Locker. And this was back in the late 80s, around the time when the original Jordans came out.
That's an exciting time to be in the shoe business.
Oh, yeah. No, it was like we had to have crazy security like for those shoes because people were trying to shoplift them left and right.
Oh, wow. And how old were you at the time? Was this a high school, college, or post-college?
Yeah, this was like high school. Yeah, I was like 16, 17, something in that range. Yeah.
Do you have any siblings?
I have a brother, younger brother.
Yeah, my high school experience was some kids worked, some kids didn't. I got my first job when I was 15 years old. I created it myself, and I feel like the proportion of high schoolers that don't have to work but want to anyway is kind of small. Like, do you feel like you were just ready to start earning money? Like, or did your parents say, go get a job?
I certainly wanted to earn money, but I probably would have chosen something else to do with my time at that point if I had the choice. But no, Dad said, no, you're going to go work. And it turned out to be a good thing. So that was actually my first exposure to sales.
Oh, yeah.
Was in the store. So certainly it was a great experience. And, I think it ties in with some of the things that I'm doing now.
Yeah. What'd you study at UF?
My degree is in a really tiny discipline of engineering called geomatics, surveying and mapping. And so studied that. I had probably 10 different majors over the course of about 5 years. Yeah. And I finally decided I'd settle on one and get out of there before they invited me to leave otherwise. And that actually worked out really, really well because, I went to work for a small consulting firm in that industry. I was the 10th employee in, and that led to the opportunity to be able to run that company about 4 years later. And so I sort of stumbled into that, all along the way. It was just a series of falling forward into that, but worked out really, really well.
Yeah. So when you started at this engineering firm, were you actually a man out on the ground pulling the stakes and looking for iron pipes and things, or were you kind of working in the CAD trying to design layouts or any of these things?
Yeah, I was more on kind of the computer side of it and interfacing with the clients. Early on, I think one of the reasons that I got the opportunity to run that firm so young was that, most engineers don't want to go talk to other people. You
Yeah.
know, they like the technology, they like, the technical aspect of whatever discipline they're practicing. But a minority of us tend to gravitate towards going out and interacting with clients and doing that kind of work. And I just enjoyed that part. And I got fortunate enough to have a really great mentor in the founder of the firm. And he just would, drag me along to all the meetings that he was going to. So it was a great learning experience.
I know this is outside of the area of your books, but to speak to your experience and my experience, mentors. I want to key in on mentors. Like, what was the role that mentor played, and do you have any advice to young people that are looking to find a mentor?
His influence on me is huge, to this day. That's really where I began to learn about business and so I was just really fortunate to have somebody that was willing to take that kind of time with me. And, as I think back about that, one of the things I used to go back and talk to folks who are coming out of college, and everybody wants to kind of gravitate towards these really, big companies that look glamorous and all that stuff. And those are great. You can find really good opportunities there. But once you get there, your job then is to get out of the pile and somehow differentiate yourself. I had a really different experience. I went into a small company. I was able to do lots of different things. So at one point or another, I had kind of worked in every aspect of that company
Yeah.
and got a lot of broad exposure. And I was able to get in and interface with clients and work at kind of that high level, which, as a first year person out of college, in a bigger company, I never would have had that. And so, in thinking back, like how that all worked, the mentorship was huge. Would I have had that in a bigger place? I don't know. I think having that in a small firm environment was actually pretty special.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. My professional journey started in a very similar way. As a real estate agent, I always gravitated towards the boutique firms, the specialized firms, the ones that were very kind of felt familial rather than the corporate structure. I don't know why, but I got a lot out of it. Do you think maybe it's a characteristic of a business that somebody who might be a little bit more not a 9 to 5 type of person, like I'd rather work 80 hours for myself than 40 hours for someone else? I don't know why. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why do we do this to ourselves? But we enjoy it. Like, you think we're
Well, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, there's a lot of that to it. I've just finally realized, I'm 48 years old now, and I finally realized that I don't work well for other people. I'm fundamentally unemployable, and and it's not that I don't do good work. It's that I just don't like. I want to do my own thing. I want to be the one that's leading the charge, and so I think from that standpoint, looking back, being in that smaller environment allowed me to kind of grow into that role really quickly. Whereas I don't think I would have done very well in a big company.
And so, as a young man, really as the CEO of this consulting firm, as this engineering firm, can you recall some of the pressures or insecurities that you had as somebody kind of handed the torch to you and said, "Take it from here"?
Oh yeah, I mean there were all kinds of them. I mean, and to tie this into the theme of your show, I actually got the call about this while I was out, for a week when our first daughter was born.
Yeah.
And my partner at the time, who was the founder of the company, called up and said, "Yeah, when you come back, we're going to make you, CEO." And I'm like, "Okay, well, there's a little bit of added pressure. No worries." Nah, I mean, I'll tell you, I was totally unprepared at the time. And you just sort of grow into that, I think. I was 28. I'd been in the business for 4 years. I'd had a lot of good experience and a lot of good mentorship, but I was now going to have people working for me who had more experience than I was years old.
Yeah.
And trying to manage that, and these were people that, in their mind may have very well thought that they were the logical choice for that role. And so, yeah, it was a challenging transition for sure.
Yeah, no, that's I'm sure a common experience for a lot of super motivated, ambitious people that, one of my good friends here was 23 years old running a call center with people that were twice her age that were easily overlooked. And I mean, to anybody who's trying to overcome that fear of being the boss to people that are older, do you have any advice to help them feel better about it?
I think whether it's that situation specifically or just in any new situation in business, confidence is the key. Mm-hmm. But at the beginning, you never have confidence. And so, you really kind of have to get focused and sort of commit to, I'm going to get to this level, and I think once you make that commitment, you begin to build that confidence over time. You begin to take the steps forward and get there. But, for me, it was just a matter of being committed to being really good at that. Yeah. And continuing then to progress forward, as and I made mistakes. I mean, I made a ton of mistakes. That's part of the learning process.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And now thinking about it, when I started my brokerage, I was 26, I think. And the only way that I got business was by reading the 300-page zoning ordinance that the other real estate agents weren't willing to make. So it's like you just had to be that much more committed to it than everybody else. So what was your work life like leading up to your first child? And then how did that change after a child was introduced to your world?
So leading up, I probably worked more weekends. I would sacrifice some Saturdays to get work done and get projects done. Once we introduced kids into it, that changed a little bit, and now there were more demands. My wife at the time was then staying home. And so there was certainly more pressure on me to deliver financially, but there was also pressure to be home and be present and all that. And so, from that time forward, really until now, I've kept the weekends pretty well free. Mm-hmm. And actually, I shouldn't say that. Within the last couple of years, I've probably introduced a little bit more work into the weekends. I like to get up really early and write.
Yeah.
So I'll get up before everyone else is up and I'll write. But having the weekends clear was kind of a big deal. But it's difficult. I mean, with a young family and at that time, a brand new role and a company that was growing from a kind of a local company to a statewide company, travel started coming into play and I was on the road a fair amount. And it's just one of those things you gotta find a way to find your own balance. I don't think there's a perfect formula for anybody. And I don't even like the word balance because my experience with that has been, it's always been out of balance one way or another.
Yeah.
And so there have been times when it was out of balance and, I was working those 80, 100-hour weeks. You can't do that forever. That was one of the great things that I learned from the founder of the firm was that, yeah, you can do that stuff for a little while, but 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, that's about the limit of it. Yeah. And then you got to have a break. I mean, you got to give the team a break, so you might be out of balance for a little while, but then it's got to come back in, and then you've got to go reclaim some of those days and take some time off that you were, working kind of in excess before. And so I think it swings back and forth.
Yeah. I'd imagine you had this obstacle when it came to like you were just ingrained to 80-hour weeks, and then something changed and you had to reprogram yourself? Because it's not as though, I can't imagine that you went from 80-hour weeks to, we'll just plug in 30 this week and feel the same level of accomplishment as you did at the 80. So like, was there any particular practice that you had to engage in to kind of help yourself understand that taking those Saturdays off is okay and things like that?
Well, I've talked to a lot of people who run into this, and I certainly did. Even the days that I'm off, sometimes it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah.
Even today, I love what I do. And so I also have discovered that there's so much creativity that comes from free time. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten to a point in my career where I understand that having that creativity is actually a really great asset for the business. Mm-hmm. And so I tend to protect that free time a little bit more, but it's hard to keep it from creeping back in. Ideas come and they start flowing. And I think that's just the way I'm wired. So it's one thing to carve the time off. It's another to really try and turn it off and be present with the people that you're around in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see your creativity just by nature of you having a whiteboard behind you. As I
can't draw though.
Mine is right there. And then I have another one over here and one right in front of me. Yeah, I can relate to that. So catch us up on the profile of your family. It sounds like you were married before and had a daughter, and then you've since remarried and had more kids.
Yeah, so I had 2 daughters with my first wife, and then unfortunately that didn't go the way that you hope when those things start.
Yeah.
But was really blessed to remarry not long after that, and my wife and I now have 4 children. So she had 2 sons, and I had 2 daughters. So we're sort of like the Brady Bunch light.
Yeah.
And it's just been tremendous. And we've been married for 8 years now. So it's just been fantastic. Both our oldest daughter and our oldest son are in college now. And so we're just kind of cranking them out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So I understand correctly. You biologically, you have 2 daughters and she has 2 sons, and I come from a very similar family. My parents divorced. They both remarried. My dad had more kids. My wife married a guy with kids. They both divorced again, and then one remarried again. Now stepkids. So it's modern family, Brady Bunch. It's
right.
It's beautiful. We can all have Thanksgiving together now. It's wonderful. But it seems so not surprising anymore. But the challenges are there. Of
sure,
you're now a role model for people that are you're not. I don't know what kind of challenges you had, but is there anything in particular that stands out that you're super proud about that you overcame, that somebody else that's got a stepchildren or has their own kids that are trying to ingratiate their new spouse with?
Yeah, I mean, we approached it from the standpoint of like, we don't know what the word step parent means.
Yeah.
I don't know how to be a stepdad. I don't know how to be a dad. Mm-hmm. And while, I told the boys, the day that we got married, I kind of pulled them aside and said, look, I'm not going to be your dad. I'm not replacing your dad, but I don't know how to be a stepdad. I don't even know what that means. And so, as far as I'm concerned, our relationship is going to be, father and son, and that's how I'm going to treat it. And, and I never put any pressure on them to ever reciprocate that, but I think we've done pretty well. The kids really all came together and, really did blend very, very well. And that's something that my wife and I are both very proud of. It doesn't always happen that way, and so we worked really hard on making sure that they really viewed each other as siblings, and they'll turn to each other, which is, that's really great to see.
That's got to be incredibly satisfying, like pat yourself on the back type of thing, to make this, all these pieces that were formulated in other places come together and make a full picture is wonderful. So I'm excited for you for that. So how old are your kids?
So we've got our oldest girl is 19. Our oldest son is about 10 days away from being 18. And we've got a 16-year-old daughter, and the youngest is 12, going on 13 in about a month.
Yeah. Yeah. So at what point did you start writing?
I started, I guess, 2010.
So you had kids when you started
Oh
to
yeah,
add more
absolutely.
things to what you were doing.
Yeah, no, and it was when I started the current firm, and got out of engineering and really focused on marketing and sales. It was just what had to happen to attract clients, and so I started publishing my ideas and really kind of got serious about the practice of it back in 2012. I started writing a daily every weekday email
Wow.
to our email list. Did that for 4.5 years, something like that. So, I mean, all told, I've probably easily written about 1,500 articles.
Yeah, the discipline associated with writing every single day is extraordinary. Like what allows you to be that disciplined?
Making the public commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel like that accountability is meaningful.
I mean, I made a big deal about the announcement that we were moving. We had a weekly newsletter at the time. Big deal about the announcement that we were moving from weekly to daily.
Yeah.
And I think we did it on a Thursday. I mean, this is kind of the way I work. So I had the idea on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about it for about a day or two, announced it to our list on Thursday, which is when our normal email went out, said, starting on Monday, you're going to begin getting these every day. If
Yeah.
you don't want them, you can unsubscribe below. You'd be shocked though. We really didn't get very many unsubscribes. And the next Monday we started and went for 4.5 years, and it was great for our business. But more importantly, it taught me how to be a much better writer. How to you never got in a situation where there was writer's block because you didn't have time.
Mm-hmm.
I would give myself like 20 minutes to write the email for that day.
Yeah.
And so I'd have lists of ideas and things, and usually I'd be working a few days ahead. But, I'd pull an idea and then set a timer and then go, because it couldn't take up any more time than that in the day.
Yeah.
It had to have a deadline. And, when I wrote the last word, it was quick spell check and copy, paste, set it up in the email system. And, it's going to go out in a day or two. So it will teach you to become a better writer, just the sheer volume and the daily practice.
The idea behind this podcast is to talk to entrepreneurs in part because they are their own worst critics. They are the people that self-analyze and self-critique to a point where it has to be just perfect. Whereas I find people that aren't wired to be entrepreneurs might benefit from somebody to give them direction and to motivate them. So writing every day, I got to believe, has to force you away from making that writing perfect, and that the importance isn't that it's tight and exactly right and up to your standards. It's just, I don't ever want to say good enough, but can you speak a little bit about like the being okay with the imperfection in your mind?
Well, there's no such thing as perfection.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to your message and your ideas, the things that you're using to communicate with other people, the value that you want to deliver to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always another iteration. And that exists for two reasons. Number one, because as a communicator, you're never going to get perfect. But number two, the recipient of that communication is a human being. And that human being is evolving and changing their own thinking over time. And the culture and the society is working on them. They're exposed to different things. The language that they use to describe things, the problems that they're facing that you can solve, that language evolves over time. And so there is nothing but iteration.
Yeah.
in that. And that to me was one of the most powerful things. And you don't have to do it with writing. There are a lot of ways to do that. But I think if you're the leader of a business and your job is to set the message, one of the most valuable things that you can do is create a structure for yourself where you're communicating that message different ways through all the different nuance that it has, from all the different angles it can be communicated from. And you're doing that consistently on at least a weekly basis, if not daily.
Yeah.
And I love this particular medium. I love podcasts. They give a lot of people who aren't natural writers the same kind of capability, because we can get here and we can talk through this, and you can talk through your message, particularly if you've got a situation where you're doing it with a conversation partner, whether it's an interview podcast or somebody else in your company, and you're just batting ideas back and forth. Man, what a powerful way to hone your messaging.
Truly. And not to mention, not everybody has time or even can read, but everybody with the ability to listen can listen.
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful. Well, I feel like the topics that we've been kind of skirting around for the last 3 or 4 minutes would be a pretty good segue into what you're doing now with the Unstoppable CEO and your service-oriented marketing. So can you expand on what it is that you're doing now?
Yeah, so we work with professional service businesses. So people that would normally have to get a credential, and they primarily get paid for their brains. Mm-hmm. And, in our experience, and I was one, that's kind of how I started my career. In our experience, they are expert at what they do, but not always really great or comfortable at marketing or selling or promoting what they do. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we come in. So we started off 10 years ago just consulting, giving advice to those types of businesses, helping them develop strategy. And that worked great. And we have clients that got great results. But what we discovered over that time was that most of the business owners that we worked with didn't really want to become master marketers. They wanted to stay in their lane doing what they were doing. That's what they enjoyed doing. The marketing and the sales stuff was just sort of like, yeah, I got to do that. And so a couple of years ago, we launched a done for you service because we just found that our clients didn't want to mess with any of it. And they didn't necessarily have the team or the capability or all the tools to execute marketing on a really effective level. And we started looking for ways where we could let that business owner just do the part that they were uniquely capable of doing, which was conveying the message and then building the relationships. Mm-hmm. And so, we looked at all sorts of different ways, different marketing strategies to do that. What we settled on was podcasts. The reason we like podcasts so much is that, in this sort of format, you can do a lot of different things. So we talked a few minutes ago about using it as a way to convey your message and really hone your message, but it's also a really powerful relationship building tool. And so we'll have our clients go out and connect with the influencers that they want to do business with and then be referred by, or the prospects that they want to reach that might be really hard to reach prospects. And you'd be amazed at who you can get to show up and spend an hour with you, on a podcast interview. Yeah. You got all kinds of people that you would never be able to pick up the telephone and get a hold of. We had a client, brand new client. We haven't even launched his podcast yet. He cold emailed Tony Horton. I don't know if you know that name.
Yeah, the fitness guy. Yeah.
P90X, right? Mm-hmm. Cold emailed him. I don't even know how he found his email address, but he did. And he gets a reply back in like 20 minutes from Tony's assistant. Yeah, he'd be happy to do the interview. How do we schedule it?
Yeah. Yeah.
He would never have been able to do that just by picking up the phone and saying, hey, can I talk with Tony for an hour? Mm-hmm. And whether or not that will get shared through, Tony Horton's network, I have no idea. But the point is, it gives you the ability to get in contact with people that you couldn't otherwise easily get in contact. So you can build relationships really quickly. A lot of people who look at different forms of internet marketing, they tend to look at it, I think, the wrong way. And I think podcasting is kind of prone to this this mistake as well. You always kind of gravitate towards thinking about the audience. Mm-hmm. And while the audience is valuable and everybody listening, we love you, believe me, and we're glad that you're here. It's difficult and time consuming to build a large audience.
Yes.
I was reading a book over the weekend by an author talking about podcasting, and he's listing all these case studies. And the premise of the book was how you create, thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads within the first 100 days of a podcast. And I was reading all the case studies, but in every case, it was a situation where, you had somebody who already had an extremely large audience. They had a big email list of 50,000 people or an Instagram following of 100,000 people. And then they were able to launch a really successful podcast. Well, yeah, that's great. That's really helpful though. Yeah. If you're a local business and you've got, maybe a database of a couple hundred people. So it's not going to be about the audience for you at that stage. It's going to be about the people that you're able to interact with that you wouldn't otherwise be able to interact with, to be able to give value to them first in a really easy way to start the relationship, and start it without it being about sales, and then carry the relationship forward. So it's really a relationship development tool.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And it blows my mind that it doesn't occur to more people that you need to give first, add the value first. So talk to me about your writing, your books.
So I've written 3 books. We just released the latest one, which is called The Follow-Up Formula. My first book called Unstoppable Referrals. And it really outlines a referral strategy that's really different and really takes all of the pressure out of the referral process for your client. The reason most of us don't get all the referrals that we should is because we put all the work on our clients. And, when I give speeches, I call them your unpaid, untrained sales force. They've got other things to do, other priorities, and you're asking them to do something fairly risky in bringing someone to you and putting someone they care about into a sales situation. And so that was the first one. And it was such an educational process, to actually write the book, to get it out there, to go through the promotional process, which interestingly enough, and I didn't realize the influence this had at the time, but we used the relationships that I'd developed on a podcast that I started back in 2012 to ultimately promote that book. And that's really what made it successful, was just the relationships that I developed, several years earlier. But so that was the first book. Happy to, dive into the strategy, more deeply if you'd like. But my second book is called The Exponential Network Strategy. And that's all about how we use interviews and podcasts to get clients and generate referrals. And the third book, The Follow-Up Formula, was actually one I wrote for a couple of our clients. And we decided we'd publish it because they were constantly asking me, I went to a trade show, how do I follow up with people? Or I went to a networking event, how do I follow up? Or I sent a proposal out and I hadn't heard anything back, I got ghosted. How do I follow up? And so we actually kind of wrote down our process for how we do all of that, kind of step by step, and then created templates that go with it. So it's pretty, plug and play.
That is awesome. So I'm a real estate agent. I feel like 90% of the work that real estate agents do is trying to generate leads and trying to exercise their network. And we don't get very many opportunities to actually do our job, which is protecting people in a home sale transaction, helping them find exactly what it is that they want. So the market the market gap that you are filling is wonderful. And I'll look forward to reviewing your materials in more depth, because I have no doubt me and all my people will benefit tremendously from it. How are your kids all very impressed by you and all of your writing?
No.
So, how do you find that they are influenced by you, by those that have your genetics and those that have the environment that you live in, that they see what you're doing and take after you?
Well, my oldest daughter has written a book. She wrote a book when she was 16 and self-published it to Amazon. So she's kind of going down that road. In fact, she's an English major. She's a dual major, but English is one of them, and she wants to write. And so she's kind of heading down that road. In fact, I drove her back to college a couple of days ago for her sophomore year. And on the way down, I'm trying to, give her all of my little tips. And of course, she's doing what oldest daughters do. And it's like, no, Dad, I got this, here's how you make money being an author. But, they all look at it, I think, and see that I'm doing stuff that's a little bit different. I think they're all, I'm still Dad. So I'm still, the big dork that's their dad, but they all think it's hilarious. I have a podcast and, but, it's, I don't know. I'm not sure how it's influenced them at this stage, but we'll see as they get a little bit older.
Yeah. Well, what qualities do you see in them that they may or may not admit to getting from you?
Well, my oldest daughter is probably the most like me, and she's stubborn. And she gets that from me, as much as I don't want to admit that. But no, I mean, they all have, how it is with kids. I mean, they're all unique in their own way. They all have their own kind of little personalities as they develop. That's been the most interesting thing to watch. And particularly as they kind of become older and seeing how they interact with other people, and they get their little friend groups, together and all that. It's fascinating to watch those personalities kind of evolve.
How's having kids changed you for the better over the last 19 years?
I have less hair. I don't know if that's for the better, but I have less hair than I had.
More aerodynamic. You're much faster.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's made me more patient for sure. And particularly as we approached really when our oldest daughter was approaching high school. So I'd remarried at that point. My wife and I, really started to realize that, okay, the clock is going to tick here, and then they're going to be gone. And, we really were very intentional. I had a buddy of mine who was an entrepreneur, very successful. And he told me probably 10, maybe 12 years ago, he said at the time he was going to take a couple of months off during the summers. His kids were older than mine, but at this point, his kids were kind of in middle school. Yeah. And he was going to take a couple of months off, take his boat down, go to the Bahamas, spend a couple of months in the Bahamas, just going around. And he spent a year getting his company ready for him to do this. And then he did it. And then he was able to do it the next year. And then I think the following year, they went on this multi-month trip through Europe. And he told me the reason he did that was because he knew he was going to run out of time. And then once they got to college, that was really going to be it, because there would be other competing demands on their time. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful that he did that when he did, because he passed away of cancer a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm really, really thankful that he came in my life and shared that message with me, because my wife and I had those conversations, like, as our kids were getting to be about that same age, hey, we need to start thinking about this. Let's start doing some things that we aren't going to be able to do later. And we started traveling more. And so, we were able to take the kids to Costa Rica. That was the first little international trip with all of our little Brady Bunch family, and then we took them several places in the US, and we've been able to take them up into Canada and over to Ireland, and on all of these trips where we were able to create these memories for them and for us, frankly. And I'm glad we did it when we did it, because, like I said, I just took my daughter back for her sophomore year. So we just finished the summer between her freshman and sophomore year. And she wasn't able to go on vacation with us this year. She was in class. She did summer school so that she could do study abroad next year. So I'm glad we did it at the time that we did it. I'm glad we thought that through, because as predictably as we thought, as soon as they hit college, you no longer have that opportunity. And we had a great vacation this year, but it was a very different dynamic, mm-hmm. because one of our family members wasn't there. And, and so I think that's the big thing. When I think about some of the decisions that we've made, and the fact that being an entrepreneur allowed me to kind of make my own, choices there, and be very intentional about how I'm going to, interact with the kids. Earlier, when they were a little bit younger, I decided I wanted to be the one that took them to school and picked them up from school, which, totally interrupts the workday. Yeah. But that was the most valuable time I ever had, so I spent several hours a day in the car, but I was in the car with my kids, and so being able to make those sort of choices that I couldn't have made otherwise. I don't remember what your question was. I know I've gone down a total tangent, but being able to make those decisions and have that freedom has been, I think, really rewarding for me.
So how did those times, those couple hours in the car, taking them to and from school, the vacation time where you're outside your usual environment, like how does that impact your family dynamic, your relationship with your kids?
We like to have a good time. I'll never forget. I was taking them. We had two in elementary school, and our oldest son was in middle school at that point, and he just enjoyed. I listened to this talk radio show in the mornings, and he would get in the third row in our SUV, way in the back. He was in middle school, so he had just gotten a cell phone. And he's like, "Hey, can I call in this radio show?" And so he starts calling. I mean, I think of little things like this, these little memories that we have, these little interactions that we had, during that time that I'll remember forever. So he would call in, and he was a regular enough caller. The radio show host remembered his voice, when he'd call in. And, just that kind of little stuff. We ended up with all these little sort of inside jokes from all of that. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it brings everybody closer, attaches everybody a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shared memories, I think, are critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that we're so obsessed with our jobs, our careers, our passions that are professional, that it's easy to say, I'll just miss this game, or I'll just miss this play. So I want to encourage parents out there. The common theme in all of these conversations is always, you don't get that time back.
Yeah. And don't do that. That's one thing that I'm particularly proud of. I don't know that I've missed a game. I haven't missed very many practices for any of them. Yeah. Now, sometimes that meant that I'd leave work and I'd go do that, and then I'd come back and I'd work pretty late into the evening, or I'd be getting up early. So for a long time when I was making those rounds, I was up at 4 a.m. The work still had to get done, but I picked the hours that it got done. Yeah. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah. One of my favorite topics in talking about parenting and being a parent now is context. We're in a world of accelerating change. Things are crazy, different now than they were in 2007, different than in 1985. Like, when you were growing up, what is one of the advantages that you had growing up in your era that your kids don't have in their era?
Well, I mean, obviously the electronics is a big influence on them. They don't have the boredom that we had. And I think there's a lot of value to be found in boredom. I think there's a lot of creativity that comes from boredom. Mm-hmm. We've tried to give them some of that. We built a house and moved into a neighborhood several years ago that we've got a lot of open space and a lot of trails and natural areas and places where they can kind of go and run around, and for our youngest in particular, he got more of that sort of freedom to roam. Mm-hmm. The older ones had kind of grown past that. And I think they missed that. I mean, we used to roam. We had a pack of kids. We'd roam all over our neighborhood. Our parents didn't know where we were. Yeah. I mentioned earlier, I dropped my daughter off at college. She's down in Gainesville, so she's about 2.5 hours away, and she calls the next day and she's sick and she's got a fever, and if that had happened to me when I was in school, I was just sort of laying there and I'd get over it. Well, what do? We use Shipt, which is a grocery delivery service. Footing her an Uber to go see the doctor. I mean, it's just different. And I guess it's a good thing, but at the same time, growing up, we had to just be resourceful, and you you did with a lot less information and a lot less immediate knowledge of what was going on.
Well, let's flip that question on its head now. What's something that your kids had growing up that you did not have that you feel like you could have benefited from?
They have, I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, my parents did well, but we weren't, money was always a little bit of a constraint on things. Mm-hmm. And, my wife and I are fortunate enough now that we're not, I wouldn't call us wealthy by any means, but, pretty much anything we want, we can get. Mm-hmm. And so they live in an environment where there's just a lot more abundance and a lot less constraint on the things that they do. I can remember growing up, and I grew up in Florida, but a trip to Disney was a big deal. And we only did it a couple of times when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And now our kids, they've been so much, they've got the place memorized, mm-hmm. And so it's from that standpoint, it's different, but they also have some really amazing advantages. I was talking with my daughter about, she's a theater major at UF. She's just passionate about acting, and she's good too. And she's a writer, and, the fact that she wrote a book at age 16, I think she's taken it down off Amazon now because she was embarrassed by the quality of the writing, but I said, you shouldn't have done that. You should have left it up there. Yeah. But you have this tremendous opportunity that when I came out of college in 1994, the most advanced communication technology we had was a fax machine.
Yeah.
There was no audience building. We didn't get the internet for a year. And when we got it, it came with a book, which literally was a directory of all of the websites that existed. And so you've got this ability to go now and communicate with people all over the planet and we take it for granted. I have to remind myself how truly revolutionary it is. The fact that you and I are talking right now, we're video conferencing.
Yeah.
The fact that this conversation is going to get recorded and shared with people. I mean, we used to do ghetto podcasts. I call them that now. I mean, we would interview people like this over a phone line, mm-hmm. and record that, take the recording, get it put on a CD and mail it out.
Yeah.
And that was in the 2000s.
Yeah.
So the advantage that we have with technology now to make our own way in the world, I think is just, it's going to be so tremendous for them. And that's why I'm if my daughter had gotten the 2 degrees that she's getting now, when I came through school, I would have been very worried for her.
Yeah.
Because there were not great career paths that way. But now, you can create, and you have an avenue to get it out there. And I just think there's such great things to come. And I'm a little jealous, frankly. I'd love to have another 20 years on the clock to use all of these advantages.
She's making fun of you for having a podcast because you are taking advantage of those things. So I think you're doing awesome. But you touched on something that's an interesting concept to me, because a lot of entrepreneurs come from not a whole lot and they build a lot over the course of that time. And so they often grow up poor or constrained. Jesse Itzler is a great example. Grew up, middle upper class, and now is, multimillionaire 100 times over. And he talks about letting his kids get hit in the face, like resilience. Like how do you raise resilient kids when they don't want at a level that you might have as a kid?
I think that's a really hard thing. There's all this discussion these days about bullying, and we've talked with our kids, and they'll make comments, that they use the term in a way that we wouldn't use the term.
Yeah.
Like there were a couple of times when I was bullied as a kid. I got made fun of. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of times when I got beat up. Mm-hmm. And that was just part of growing up. And you sort of, you learned how to push through that, and not to minimize or I don't want to sound like I'm condoning bullying,
Of course.
because that's not the point. But, it's like we want to remove all adversity
Mm-hmm.
from the lives of our children. And I mean, I'll never forget the time I got in a fight at school. And I went to a private school. We had to wear coats and ties. Don't ever get in a fight with a tie on. It works out well.
It's a handle.
Yeah. But, I got punched in the face, and I had to make a choice. What was I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a learning experience. That little bit of education that was painful and embarrassing in that moment was actually one of the most valuable experiences that I probably ever had.
Yeah.
Man, there was this kid that just made fun of me mercilessly in the 7th grade. Mercilessly, I mean, if it were done now, he'd have probably been expelled from school.
Mm-hmm.
And his family shamed in the local newspaper for allowing him to bully. But all he was doing was calling names.
Yeah. So what effect did that have on you ultimately?
I mean, ultimately I realized that you can call me a name and it really doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
You get to the point where you learn that all of that outside stuff is just noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that, and not just for our own kids, but for their generation, that because they haven't had all of that adversity, I mean, when we played sports, we lost games, and that was okay. Now I will say, as they're getting older and getting into more competitive sports, there's winners and losers, and it can be pretty rough. We competed on a lot of different levels for a lot of things. And I think that's okay. There's a healthy way to do it. Certainly there's an unhealthy way to do it, but I think these kids are all a whole hell of a lot stronger than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And they can persevere through stuff that we think they shouldn't experience. But when they get out into the real world as adults, they're going to quickly realize that not everybody's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And no one is looking out for their interests, and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with anyone else. It's just that human nature is we all look out for our own self-interest. The way you get along in the world is you understand that is reality, and you look for ways to align your interest with other people's interests and cooperate. And that's how things sort of move forward. But you're always going to come across somebody who doesn't want to cooperate with you.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with that? Well, I mean, my response to that has always been next.
Yeah.
I don't need that person. There's another 7.5 billion minus one, and so I hope that they learn that over time. It's one of the things we try and instill in our kids, that, it's okay to fall down and scrape your knee. You're not going to die. It's okay to get in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, because that's how you learn and grow. So I don't know, but it's a challenging thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And through that response, a question popped in my head. I'm not sure how to ask it or if it makes any sense, but I'm going to give it a try. And then I'll jump into some short answers to be sensitive to your time. But I think about, what parents of kids who just started listening to Elvis would say to their kids. Like, you shouldn't listen to that. That's the devil's music. You shouldn't move like that, all these things, and like that's what was happening then. That's the context. That's the difference between this generation doesn't understand that generation. And so my wife and I talk about our kids and like, what are going to be the things that we just cannot relate to? Like, we're the parents that just don't get it. Like, just like your parents my parents just don't get it. Like, can you think of anything that like they've experienced that they say, Dad, you just don't understand?
Yeah. Social media.
Yeah.
The way that they use social media and the way that they communicate.
Mm-hmm.
It's primarily through text, whether it's a, true text message or Snapchat or whatever, and the way that they're always connected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my wife and I joke, like, we're going to install a phone with a rotary dial and a long cord, and anytime you want to talk, like we told our sons, anytime you want to talk to a girl, that's where you have to go. And we're going to tell the girls, anytime a boy calls, that's where the call is taken. We had to have those conversations out in the open in front of the entire family, and there wasn't I mean, in my house, we didn't have a long cord on the telephone. My wife's like, yeah, at least we had like the 12-foot or 15-foot cord. I could walk around the wall,
Yeah.
They could listen, but I didn't have to look at them, and so that's the part we don't get. It's like, like I was driving my daughter to school this morning and she's getting texts from her friends. What do you get? We're 6 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
Why are you texting your friends at this time? Come on.
Oh,
and the constantness of that, and I find, and I worry a little bit about that. I mean, particularly with the studies that are coming out now with the effect of that kind of constant connection on the brain. And so we haven't figured out an answer to it. So if you've got one, I'm all ears, but I do think that's the one area where like, we don't get it at all.
Yeah, to respond to knowing the answer, the best answer I have is just not understanding it. It's that maybe, just spitballing, maybe it's part of the evolution of human biology that communication will just forever be different. That humans, you see that evolution of, the little monkey and then getting up taller and taller. Like, it's so easy to think that we're the end, but the next one might look more robotic or alien-like because all of our intelligence has been shifted onto a machine that's either in our hand or installed inside. I don't know, but I can put my tinfoil hat on and come up with all that stuff. But let me get into some short answer stuff to talk about parenting. And I'll start with this one because as a writer, you might enjoy it. If you were writing a book about being a parent, what would be the name of a couple chapters?
Well, there would definitely be a chapter in there about do as I say, not as I did, because we hope that they don't make some of the mistakes that we made. And there would probably have to be a chapter in there titled Because I Said So. And I think every parent can relate to that.
So, do you have a favorite fictional dad, TV dad, or movie dad?
Gosh, the time I grew up, Bill Cosby was the dad, but you can't say that anymore.
Yeah, you have to qualify it.
He was like America's dad I grew up in the 80s. So, gosh, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you, the one I can relate to the most is probably Steve Martin in, what was the movie where he was in? I can't remember the name of the movie now, but he was Fatherhood, I think, or something like that.
It might be
Father of the Bride.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there's Parenthood and Father of the Bride.
Yeah. Getting those two conflated.
So what's the greatest hope that you have for your children?
That they're happy and that they understand that that's a choice that they get to make every day.
What kind of father would you like to be remembered as?
Fair, I think.
That's a great answer. I've never heard that answer. Fair.
I don't know why that word came into my head, but that came into my head.
No, I think that's wonderful. So what's the best piece of advice that you've been given as a parent?
I think what I shared honestly earlier about paying very close attention to the time that I got from my friend who passed away. That's probably the best piece of advice I've ever had. Now, you can choose to kind of act on that in any different, number of ways. We chose to travel and I chose to prioritize driving the kids over being in the office. But that was probably the biggest wake-up call for me. And that happened, I'd already set that in my mind before he passed away. And when he passed away, it put a gigantic exclamation point on it.
Yeah. The billboard question. If you were driving on, 10? If you were driving on 10 from Jacksonville to Tallahassee and every dad drove by your billboard at 80 miles an hour and they could read one piece of advice you would give to every father, what piece of advice would that be? Has to fit on the billboard.
Has to fit on the billboard. Ah, man. These are challenging questions. I think pay attention.
Love it. If money was no object, if time or space was no object, what gift would you give to every father?
I think the best gift you can give to any parent is time.
Yeah. Okay, so I have two more questions. The first is, when in your life do you feel the most love?
I have to say, when I'm in prayer in church, there are days when I just know that there's that connection to God.
Mm-hmm. And my final question, if this recording and video lasts forever and you could send a message through the generations of the Gordon family, what message would you deliver to your kids, their kids, and their kids?
It's kind of become the mantra on our podcast, but stay unstoppable.
Yeah. Stay unstoppable. So, Steve Gordon, tell us where everybody can find you, your website, any of your social media handles.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at Steve_Gordon, and our website is unstoppableceo.net. And we actually put together a page just for listeners of the show. And so if they go to unstoppableceo.net/LTD, and they can go there and then get a free copy of my second book, The Exponential Network Strategy. And we got some other resources that they can find there. So if you're looking to grow your firm and grow your business, there's some things that might help you there.
That's awesome. And the faster our business grows, the faster we can hand it off to somebody else to run, the more time we can spend with our kids.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Tyler, this has been fun. Thank you.